Well, hello. Did you know we live in a society? Because that's what most occult literature will tell you. We live in a society. And the reason why this is a problem is because most occult literature is from the past and it is guiding you on how to help with the social issues of 100 years ago. But it's phrased like it's written today. A lot of times I will see someone on social media comment something like, wow, it's as if this was written today, or they could be talking about the issues that are going on right now. And on the one hand, yes, they could be. But on the other hand, you really don't know whether they would actually say that if they were here today and if they were experiencing the issues of today. They were commenting on what was happening in the 1800s, in the 1300s, in ancient Greece. I think that it's really important to study the classics, but I also think that it's a little weird to see so many people in this modern day and age, like right now in this society, practicing stoicism kind of uncut because stoicism is a reaction to things that were happening in ancient Greece and you have no idea what the society was like. You only have fragments of literature from it. And so much occult literature is from very well-meaning people of the time trying to write guidance for people of their era on how to better their society. And I think that's great. I think it's great to write about how to better your society and also to connect with your society and reach out and give guidance on that. It's just that whenever you write that in a book and someone reads that book 300 years later, um apparently no one who's reading these materials right now is kind of cutting them with the salt of reason, I guess, because you cannot take a treatise that was written 1,000 years ago and apply that directly to society today. We are going through different things. We can go through similar things and we can go through some of the same things, but we're going through totally different things than anything has ever happened in the world before. And there are issues right now that are in play that have never been experienced by the societies whom these materials are coming from. Essentially, what you're doing is you're using time travel advice. It's like if somebody were looking for advice on this society and then they randomly traveled back in time to like 300 years ago and they asked like the smartest person back then, not even the smartest person, just like a random guy, it's always a guy, who has probably a title to a land and a household and staff like that because these were usually lords who had these materials and were making them. Um, or hey, an alchemist monk. Ask an alchemist monk from the 1600s or the 1300s or 200 BC, like, hey, could you help us with our society in 2022? We have a plague. Could you help us with our plague? Well, if you ask some guy from 1300 AD to help you with a plague, do you think they're going to give you advice that's really relevant to today in the era where we have injectable vaccines and in like his time there is something like surgery that we know today, but like it's not at all what we have today, of course. They would have had some kind of medical assist for things, but they didn't have vaccines in 1300 AD. So you would get no like good advice on how to defeat a pandemic from a 1300 AD monk. And that's what essentially you're doing if you look in a grimoire for advice on social issues of today. It's not that it's not applicable, it's just that you're taking historical materials and you're applying them to what's going on right now. And the thing is, like, a lot of the people writing these grimoires, writing these occult books, these alchemical treatises, they're speaking very generally, and they're speaking in very general terms towards an audience of their peers specifically, their peers from their time in their country, probably in their very specific secret society. And that means that they feel really open to say a lot of stuff that they probably wouldn't say to you. And I don't mean that as in like, who are you to like be talked to by these guys? I mean, like, they probably knew a lot of stuff between them that they don't mention inside of the materials. In fact, I think that there's a lot of times where there's occult materials that we're trying to use rituals for that probably have in jokes in them that we just don't understand. The best way to keep something secret is oral tradition, which means that you only tell people directly the thing that is vital to whatever it is that you're doing. So let's say there's one component of the ritual that you absolutely need for it to work. Well, you don't write that down. And you don't even indicate in the text that it was needed. You just skip it. And then you just tell all your friends what the actual technique is, and nobody ever writes it down because they all know. And does that survive 400 years later? Usually not. Um, Usually we have no clue what it is that's missing. We only have the text left behind, and we can only extrapolate from the text so much. Um, that's why I think that you should, anytime that you use an older text for anything, you should do some divination to see if there's something else that you should be bringing into the equation, something else that you should be doing, because you don't really know what's been left out of that material. You don't know what's been lost over time. If there were pages that are now gone, you simply just don't know. For all we know, that book was one of five, and you were supposed to have all five to do the thing, and it just never mentions the other five. In fact, most people don't know that Ars Goetia, the one that has all of our favorite 72 demons in it, it's one book out of several in a larger book. That the Lesser Key of Solomon is a larger book that it contains the Goetia in it, and they all form a whole. And if you understand that whole, what's going on in the Goetia alone makes a little bit more sense. It also helps to know that you should be pairing this with either the Key of Solomon or an equivalent, as in the Lesser Key of Solomon. The lesser part of it means that it's a supplement. It's like DLC. So you're playing one chapter of the DLC. You don't have the whole game. It's basically what's going on with the Goetia. And I guess the biggest component of what's wrong with occult literature, and I just want to say what's wrong with occult literature because that way someone will comment like, no, there's nothing wrong with occult literature. Like, sure, whatever. Like, the thing that's wrong with occult literature is that it's old. It's old and you don't know what's missing. The whole point of occult literature is that it's a secret. It's about secrets. It is about the hidden, or it was hidden. And the nature of what's hidden is you don't know what else is hidden. If you have revealed what's hidden, you don't know what else is hidden that you haven't revealed. There's always going to be another mystery. So if you are reading material that is even from the 70s, this is a danger. I actually there's a lot of psychic and occult material from the 60s and into the 70s. Really, the 60s is the time period where most of these ideas originated, but it made it into the books by the 70s. And then by the 80s, a lot of people are reading that material, digesting it, and further extrapolating on it in their own way. So I'd say that the material exists in the 70s to 80s, but the ideas are from the 60s. So a lot of them use psychology. And the problem with 60s psychology is that we've done some more psychology since then, and it turns out there was more to the story. So there's, for instance, Prometheus Rising. Prometheus Rising is one of the foundational texts on like applying psychology to magic from the last century, and it's wrong. And I don't mean that as in it's unusable or it's bad to use it or that you shouldn't use it. Actually, it's very usable. I think it's good to use it, and I think that some people should use it. Um, but it's incomplete. It is incorrect in places. Actually, if you have to read Cosmic Trigger to get the right order of the circuits, because he got 6 and 7, he mixed up the order of the two circuits, and like You don't know that if you read the book, because it's a mistake in the book, and because it's a mistake in the book, it's not noted. You have to look it up to find out that there's a mistake in the book. And this is with any book. I know this can be from a book that was printed in 2020, but um like it's not about a mistake making into the book. It's about never knowing that there was a mistake in the first place. Just reading it all through and accepting that all of this is exactly how they wanted. Having a critical eye towards accidental errors is actually very good to do whenever you're looking through old grimoires, any kind of like old occult materials from before printing presses or before like modern printing, because they didn't really have a chance to correct much. So you have again the oral tradition where it may not have even been an oral tradition. There might have been an extra piece of paper that they would slip inside the book that had the corrections, which is still a common thing to do. And what if the corrections never made it to us? What if we never have the corrections? Um, and like if there was no corrections paper, if you simply just told your people who you gave the book, like let's say that the author made 12 copies of this book. I mean, that's generous considering that a lot of these would have been handwritten. Let's say the author made 12 copies of these books, like one for himself and 11 for all of his friends that he wants to talk to about this stuff and who he's allowing to do this. So every time that the author gives somebody a book, he says, by the way, the ritual there with the fire angel, I got two of the steps mixed up. You should do it in this order. Sorry, couldn't really do anything because I figured that out after I wrote all the copies, and I don't want to just scratch it out on the page. So you figure out how you want to deal with it, but that's how you should do it. And again, we would never get any of this. This is a conversation that someone had hundreds of years ago that we'll have no knowledge of. So the nature of the occult is that it's hidden. That's what occult means. It's obscured, hidden, and you cannot see it the way that you can see other things. And we're a very sight-based animal, humanity is. So you need to know, you need to understand, and you need to be able to approach material that is occult in a way that helps illuminate the occult for yourself, but also helps acknowledge like this is occult material and there's always going to be something about it in its nature that is hidden, obscured, or mystified. And knowing that when you go in, I think, I mean, it's kind of like you could you could walk into an old house, and if you knew ahead of time that it had a very unreliable floor, you'd probably walk pretty carefully and you'd make it through just fine. But if you didn't know that it had an unreliable floor and you just walked in and you walked very confidently, maybe even ran at places, you might fall through the floor. And you couldn't be blamed for just going forward and walking as if like the floor was normal, because most people assume that the floor is going to be normal in a house. But if you'd had that extra knowledge, it would have saved you a lot of trouble. And this is pretty much what I'm trying to do here. So we live in a society, and everyone's always lived in a society if they're writing a book. You don't have the resources to write a book if you don't live in a society. That's kind of the trick of it. Um, the people writing these occult pieces of literature, they're often tapped into higher forces, important cultural zeitgeist type of stuff. And these forces are, trying to tell the author what the author should know and what the author should pass on to other people. And sometimes the author is tapping into things like the collective unconscious of his entire country. And so the collective unconscious of his entire country is like, hey, oh my gosh, you're listening. Nobody ever listens to me. Well, here's all the things that you need to do about your society right now. And like that can present itself as very important, and that a cult author might put that in their next work with, like, the emphasis of, I believe that the angels have told me this. And that can be presented as just as important as all of the other ideas that were in the work that might be more applicable to the entire rest of the world, because that's what one country's society needed in that one time period, according to that one author's lens into the collective unconscious. But, like, what anybody else needs is going to be different. So, basically, taking occult material and applying it in a very general sense, applying it without any filter, and applying it without really thinking through what it is really intended for, what was originally intended for, can be dangerous. Now, reading this material for inspiration for your own work, like trying to say, some people read the Bible and they get pulled toward a certain verse and that helps them go towards something in their life. Um, you can do that with pretty much anything. It's just be aware that the material you're reading, like, say, if you're reading a theosophy, if you're reading any kind of theosophy material, there's eugenics in there. You should not consider that a sign that you should start bringing eugenics into the modern society. That's just an unfortunate historic part of reading theosophy material. And in fact, you can find it in the material of, like, so many people in, like, the circa the 1900s, and many other times as well. But, like, there's just so much eugenics material, I'd say, in the first 25 years of the 1900s, that is just completely unquestioned by the author who's writing the text. It's just spouted off as, like, hey, science is saying now that we should use eugenics to cure all ills. And that's not what science is saying right now, here in the year of our Lord 2022. But that was what a lot of science was saying back in 1900. And we simply can't apply one to the other without a critical lens. That's really what it takes. It's just a critical lens. You have to be cognizant of just the origins of the material that it is that you're working with and the original purpose. I think that there's this desire to take this material that's been found from so long ago and apply it to all problems. And maybe it shouldn't be applied to all problems. Maybe it was good for its time, and it can be learned from in some ways, and it's of historical value as well. But there's a lot of material out there that its time is actually done, and it's historical material forever. It's not really something that we're going to be applying one-to-one to the modern era. Its time has passed. That's why it's in the past. And I think sometimes these materials, they seem like they really should be, like, reverently paid attention to and followed, because, like, say, if you find an old book, it does feel like a tome, and it does feel like an old book should be listened to and unquestioned. And it's like there's something about it that's holy and important and relevant, but it's just an old book. Those are just appearances. It turns out they made all old books like that. It's actually kind of depressing if you're a book collector to look through old books, because a book cannot be judged from its cover, especially in the 1800s, because all the 1800s and 1700s books, their covers, and going back into the 1600s, like, these books looked great. And by the time it gets to you from, like, several hundred years ago, it looks like super old and super important. It looks really cool. Like, here's one. Like, this is only 100 years old, but it's like, oh my gosh, this is an old book that is so important. It's like, it's mostly just full of astrological tables, actually, and none of them are going to be useful because they're all for, like, 100 years ago. But, like, if you went by the cover and stuff, you'd be like, oh my gosh, this is like wisdom of the ages. It's a wisdom of a past age. A lot of stuff is in there for how to treat your illnesses with astrology, and it's not relevant to today because we don't have the same chemicals and the same medicines right now as we did 100 years ago. So almost all of the chemistry is out of date. We know better chemistry by now. That's not the author's fault from the time. They were doing the best of what they had at the time. It was probably really good for what it was at the time, but now it's almost completely useless in a way. Most of this material, I believe, is valuable so we can understand how people from the past thought about things, and how people from the past, like what it is that they had to work with, and what progress humanity has made to get to where we are now. But it's time for us to write our materials of today, and to make guides for the modern era of how we should do things now, not using 60s psychology, using modern psychology, not using 1900s medicine, but using modern medicine. Or, and I know that this kind of sucks, but back in the 1900s it was legal to give a lot more medical advice than it's legal to now, and maybe we should just stay out of it. There's a lot of advice you can give somebody about their health in general without giving, say, doctor's advice. But there's a lot of books from, you know, heck, there's a lot of books even today that are giving advice they shouldn't be giving about health. Nowadays, we actually can get good, accurate medical advice from a variety of sources. And so occult materials don't need to be providing this. But at a certain point, occult materials providing this medical information was giving people something that they had no access to whatsoever. And so, like, any help was good help. Now, giving someone help for medical stuff with occult materials is probably not the best help available. So, I'll leave you with that. I hear my cat telling me it's time to close. Thanks for listening / watching. If you did, if you didn't, then I don't know how you're listening to me right now. That's pretty cool. Anyway, ciao.